Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss another important concept in Entity Framework core, and that is how to call a stored procedure using this ORM. In the past couple of videos, we have discussed that we can use an ORM to perform a CRUD operation. We can use navigation properties to fetch data from database, and they work quite well. But sometimes we have to retrieve record from multiple tables. In those scenarios, it might be possible that we want to go back to the native SQL procedures because that is quite easy to write it down, or we can say that as a developer, we already have a sweet spot to work with a SQL stored procedure. Whatever a reason would be in your case, the good part is Entity Framework Core is capable of calling a stored procedure as well while working with the other parts of it. We can simply create a stored procedure and we can ask our entity framework core to execute them for ourselves, and there is no need of doing any messy configuration. So in this video we will discuss the different ways of how to do this process quickly and effectively so that we can also leverage the functionality of an ORM for other parts, and whenever we want we can switch back to my stored procedure for performing a complex operations. In this demo, we are going to discuss three different techniques of store procedure. I have already created a store procedure for you guys, and in the first example, we'll discuss that how can we call a store procedure by passing a parameter. So we will be discussing that we will be passing a department ID into my store procedure, and we'll be fetching a different records based on the department ID. To start with, let's quickly jump to my SQL, and you can see I already have a procedure over here written, and this procedure performs a join between three different tables. The first table is my user table, and then user profile table, and then department table. And in response, this procedure is giving me these columns. This is quite simple query and we can easily apply it with LinkQ as well. But even in those cases, if you want to use the full potential of SQL, then this is the right place. If I execute this store procedure, you will notice that it gives me a couple of responses, and it basically gives me all those users that are belong to a particular department. In my case, department name is inventory. So we'll be using this part of procedure as a part of a demo. The very first step, if you want to use a store procedure in an EF core, is you need to create a class file. A class file which is having a property similar to the response of a store procedure. So in current scenario, I am returning ID, name from this procedure. So I have to navigate back to my project and I have to create a class file similar to this one. Now this class file consists of all those properties with all the names exactly same. I'll again repeat, whatever name you are returning from your column, you have to put the same name inside your properties because that will help EF core to map those things. Now, once the class file got created, we know that in Entity Framework core, DB context is the heart of my this ORM, and we need to register it in different places. As the next step, you have to register the newly created class inside a DB context, and you have to wrap it up inside a DB set property. So we discussed in the last session as well that whatever table we want to create inside Entity Framework core, that should be a part of my DB set. The same thing which I have to do over here as well. We need to register or make an entry inside of a DB context class, and that entry name should be public DB set followed by the class name, and then you can give any familiar name of your choice. It's not mandatory to give the SP name over here. You can give whatever name you want as a class name. And this line. So this line is very important to understand. Let me zoom it for you guys so that we can discuss this. So this line says that I am defining an entity with the name of my class file name, and it has no key. So first of all, I have to tell EF code that this entity does not consist of any primary key. As no key is a fluent configuration of telling EF code that it does not include any primary key. And then finally, we have to say that to view null, which means I am telling EF core that this particular table is not mapped, or I should say this particular class is not mapped to any table. I'll again repeat this part. This is very important. And if you don't write this statement, so whenever you create a new migration next time, Entity Framework core will try to generate a table based on this class in your migration script itself. So don't forget to include this line inside your on model creating method once you have defined the class file. Now, after these two configurations are done, you are good to go. You can simply call the store procedure with a simple approach. So I'll navigate to my user controller, and you can see inside user controller, we are having a method. And this method simply says a fetch department by department ID, where I am passing a department ID in the request. Now, in order to call the store procedure, we need to first of all create a parameter. And this is the parameter which I have created inside my store procedure itself. Please make sure that the attribute which you are defining as a part of this parameter, that is at the rate ID in this case, should match with the parameter name that you have defined inside the stored procedure. So in my case, the stored procedure parameter name is at the rate ID, and the same at the rate ID should be defined inside my parameter while calling from C sharp. Then you need to call a DB context object, and since we have registered the particular procedure inside my DB set context, it will be available over here, and then you will be using from SQL raw. Now the advantage of from SQL raw is you can pass a single SQL statement to call the stored procedure. This will do two things. First of all, it will execute the stored procedure against my SQL server, and whatever results that I'm getting back from the stored procedure will be mapped to this class object. Okay, so that is how it works. And this is the final step that you have to do while calling a stored procedure that returns certain list of output or list of properties as a part of your current application. Let's quickly check the changes. I'll run this code and I'll navigate back to the Swagger to understand the response type. So I'm back to my Swagger, and you can see I already have a endpoint name as API user fetch department by department ID, and I'll provide a department ID in this Swagger instance 1. And if I click on execute, it will execute against my database. It will fetch all the records based on department ID, and you can see the same record is coming back from my Swagger itself, right? So the whatever the code, whatever the output that I was getting while running the query inside my SQL, the same output I am expecting or I am getting in my Swagger itself. So in simple terms, whenever you want to run a stored procedure inside an EF core that returns a list of operations, you need to create a class, and inside this class you can define all the properties, and then you need to register this class inside DB context, and finally you have to make sure to tell EF core that you are not planning to create a table for this class, and this can be only done by defining the highlighted line. Now this is fine. The next step or the next question, the next part which we can do is that a stored procedure is performing a CRUD operation. So how we can do this? Maybe we are passing some parameters to my stored procedure, and that is simply inserting a record into my database, and it is not returning anything. If that is the case, then we have to perform in a different way with an EF core. So for demo purpose, I have already created a store procedure. It's a simple one which simply inserts a new department into my department table, and it take a parameter as department name in the request. In this case, what we'll be going to do is we'll navigate back to my controller, and my department controller, I already have a method which says create department. And this create department accepts a parameter name as department name, and in this time, there is no need to create any class in your entity framework code. Why so? Because you are not expecting an output from a stored procedure. And you can simply run a raw SQL statement with the help of a command named as SQL.ExecuteRaw. So you can see that this raw statement can be executed by sample db context dot database dot execute raw sync, and this line of code is capable of running your SQL stored procedures inside your database. Now I am calling the same procedure which I had created into my SQL instance. You can see the procedure name is dbusp insert department, and I am passing a parameter as a department name. Again, you have to make this clear that whatever the parameter that you have defined inside the procedure, the same parameter should be defined as a part of your parameter param. and then you will be passing this parameter, and once you run this, you will be creating a new parameter or new department inside your database. Let's quickly verify these changes. So I'll navigate back to my database first, and let me check the list of departments that I am currently having in my database itself. You can see I only have two departments. One is inventory, second is supply chain. Let's try to create a new department. I'll jump back to the Swagger again, and I'll navigate to the endpoint and give a department name as technology. And once I press execute, it will again call my APIs. It will perform the validations if there are any, and then it simply call my DB context, and it will try to create a new record. And you can see my API is working fine. I'm getting a response department created successfully. And if I navigate to my database instance again, if I verify the changes, you will notice that I have a new record in my database, and that is technology. So if your stored procedure is performing any kind of CRUD operation, or maybe in simple terms, if you don't want to return any output from a stored procedure, then in that case, you can simply use the way of calling a stored procedure with the raw SQL async. So up to this point, we have covered two scenarios. The first one was whenever we want to return a list of objects. The second one was whenever we want to only perform a CRUD operation and my SP does not return any kind of output. The third and the another important way of calling a stored procedure with return parameter. So while working with an SP, you must come across a situation where you want to return some parameters or maybe some output from a stored procedure itself. Let's discuss how we can do this. So I've already created a stored procedure as well, and it is a simple one. I am having a table named as products into my database. Now you can see that my table consists of these products, which is television, mobile, refrigerator, and camera. And my output statement, I really want to have a total count of my products. It's a very simple procedure, but you can get a gist of it that we can create a complex one as well that simply returns a output parameter. So if this is the case, then how can we do in a context of an entity framework code? I'll again jump back to my Visual Studio, and I'll show you how this can be done. So for this particular demo, I have created a new controller named as product controller, and this is the way where I can use it. So likewise, my first example, since we are also returning an output from this method, from this procedure, we need to create a class file. And this class file consists of all the two properties which you are trying to call from a procedure itself. In my current example, if I execute this procedure, you will notice that I am only returning an ID and a product name, right? Along with a top total of top count. So this top count is my output parameter. So what we're returning is we're returning an ID and product name from this procedure, and hence I have created a class file with the two properties inside it. One is ID and then product name. Then I'll navigate back to my procedure, and this is how we have to do this. First of all, we need to define a parameter, a top parameter. You can name it whatever you want, but this is my return parameter. We need to also give that direction. If you're coming from an edu.NET background, you must reconnect with this statement. So while working with an edu.NET as well, we have to define the direction of my parameter. The same thing we have to define while working with the stored procedures using an EF code. So I've defined my total parameters, its type, its direction, and then it's quite simple. The same old way that we have discussed in step number 1. So we will be calling a DB context class, and inside DB context class, we will be simply registering the store procedure. We will be executing a raw statement. Whatever the parameter we want to pass, we'll pass it, and we'll also pass the total parameters and count, and then we'll convert it into tool async. And whatever the output we will be getting in this object, that will be returned as a parameter output. So I can quickly run this against my data, against my APIs. So I'll navigate back to my products API, and then I'll click on get products and try it out. And you will notice that it will again navigate back to my this method, and it is executing. It is giving me total count. My total count is 4, because if you can rely on the database itself, there are only 4 products in my database, right? And we are returning the count star from product itself. And in this way, you can notice that I can return the total count from my API, right? So in this way, we can notice that working with an EF core is quite easy. And I should say working with an stored procedure with an EF core is quite easy. Anywhere down the line, if you feel that you are not able to write a complex queries in LinkQ, feel free to come back to the native SQL statements, write a stored procedure, and you can use it with your EF core in the way that we have discussed so far. This is it for this video, guys. I will be attaching the script as well as the source code into my GitHub profile, and I'll give you the GitHub profile inside the in the comment section itself. If you want to download the entire code which I have been using in the entire session, you can go and download it. Thanks for watching. Please share this to your friends. Please like my channel. Please subscribe to it. This will keep me motivated to generate a new content for you. Thank you.